Hello and welcome to the third part of my bookshelf tour. As usual, we are starting on the top of the shelf. On the left-hand side, this is an edition of the complete works of the German writer Friedrich Schiller. I think I don't need to tell a lot about him. Schiller is next to Goethe, considered one of the most important writers of the classical era in German literature. And yeah, this is a nice complete edition. I always like it if there are some traces of the previous owners in the books. As we can see here, there's a nice sticker and ex libris of a lady or girl named Carola Grosch, who has received this edition as a present on the 24th of December, 1932. So in Germany, Christmas presents are given on the 24th. And yeah, 32, that makes us think of what happened to these people, because this was just 1 month before the Nazis came to power. On the right-hand side here, there's a collection this is a series of Polish literature, but in German translation. So Poland is a neighboring country, so it should be very close to us, but unfortunately very little of Polish literature is available in German translations. But the publishing house Surkamp in the 1980s and 90s, they tried to bridge that gap by issuing this nice series. They called it the Polish Library. And so there are a couple of major works from Polish literature were issued in these nice volumes. If you want to take a look at the Polish literature, for example, Kornel Filipowicz would be a good starting point. This is a collection of short stories, The Cat in the Wet Grass, and I think many of these short stories have also been translated into English. There should be anthologies available of the works of Kornel Filipowicz. Another author I would like to pick is Wladyslaw Reymont. He was once well known because he was the winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, I think in 1923 or 24. He received the Nobel Prize for his major 4 volumes novel, The Peasants. And this is a real doorstopper, but an easier starting point would be a collection of his short stories like this one. And I think many of them have been translated also in English. If you're interested, try to look out for an anthology of short stories by Wladyslaw Reymont. I think it's really worth taking a look into it. Maybe I will talk about his major works, The Peasants, in another video as a part of my series on Nobel Prize winners. Okay, here we have the complete German translations of the works from Vladimir Nabokov. I don't need to go into that because this was part of the first bookshelf tour. On the right-hand side next to it, there are 2 Russian writers. The first one is Ivan Goncharov, and these are 2 novels. Oblomow, I think it's published in English under the same name. And the second one, I think the English title is The Same Old Story. So Oblomow is about this lazy young man who is frustrated because like so many middle-class bourgeois or intellectual Russians in the middle of the 19th century, they didn't have much opportunities to participate actively in the society because the regime was so strict and it regulated. And so Oblomow here really failed by falling into complete laziness. And The Same Old Story is a story that is a bit of a satirical analysis of the exaggerated romanticism. So a young man with many unrealistic ideals has some more or less educated to become a bit more pragmatic and realistic. Next to it, it's Mamin-Sibiryak, a novel. I think the English title is The Privalov Fortune. It's really a highly funny and satirical novel about a young man who returns to his home village, and there are some rumors that he has inherited millions of rubles, and so the whole village is excited. They are all very greedy, and all young women are prepared by their parents to try to get hold of this young man, and in the end there is a funny ending. Next to it, a bit of French literature in these nice editions from the 1950s, leather-bound, printed on India paper, gilt top edge, and this is Emile Zola, Nana, part of his large series of novels, and next to it 3 volumes of Stendhal, which is the pseudonym of Henri Beyle. This is, I think, his most well-known works. Red and Black should be the English title, about this young opportunistic man who has no principles at all. He's fully opportunistic and always looking for his advantage, and still by these character traits he makes it up through the ranks in society. So yeah, nice leather volume, some flaws on the spine due to the age, but I think they're still nice volumes, like them very much. Here we have another volume by Ivan Goncharov, this Russian novelist of the mid of the 19th century. This is his last novel. I think he considered it his major work. The English title is, I think, The Precipice, and it's again about a young Russian intellectual who suffers from his uselessness because there's no real way for him to contribute to society. So he's searching for a way to find his role, and it's a nice panorama of Russian society and different approaches to life, from piety to nihilism and anarchism and revolutionary, but also more bourgeois approaches to life, and they are nicely portrayed in this novel. Then there's a Spanish novel, Fortunato Jacinta, which I have not yet read, so this is still on my TBR list. And George Eliot's Middlemarch. The German translation, I won't talk about it because I prefer to talk about the original English edition in another video. And then there are 2 volumes of Laurence Sterne, the famous English satirical writer, Sentimental Journey, which also made a big influence on the German literature. It really triggered a whole literary movement, the so-called Empfindsamkeit or sentimentalism, and of course, Life and Opinion of Tristram, Shandy, Gentleman. This is such a funny, hilarious book with so many. It's a sort of a fake biography. It's not a biography. It's starting like one, and then there are all these digressions and description of very unique characters like the Uncle Toby. And then next to it, we have a Russian writer, Josef Kallinikow. I'm afraid, I think his works have not been translated into English. This is a novel, Frauen und Mönche. The English title would be Women and Monks, and it's a panorama of the Russian society around a cloister, and it's a sort of satirical description of how the piety and the gullibility of simple people of the lower class are exploited and misled by various actors. So it gives a good insight in the rural life in Russia, and especially the specific way of Christianity that was popular among the lower class people, and how easily they had been tricked and misled by various characters. Thomas Mann, one of the most important German writers of the 20th century, he loved this novel, he appreciated it, he talked very positively about Josef Kallinikow, but I'm afraid that nowadays he's almost forgotten. This was the first edition issued, I think, in 1928 or 29, and I'm not sure whether there have been any reprints. So then there are 3 nice leather-bound volumes of Matthias Claudius, who was a German poet of the late 18th, early 19th century. He was a very pious writer, and so many of his poems are really deeply immersed in piety and in nature. His most famous poem is also famous as an evening song in Germany. Der Mond ist aufgegangen. Maybe it's also known in English, Behold, the moon has risen. It's very popular, and even nowadays people sing this song. On the right-hand side, there's Curiosity. It's a book by Nicolai, Sebaldus Notanker. This is a work of the early German Enlightenment. So this is a novel about not a priest, a parson in a rural area in Germany who is more interested in the well-being of his fellow citizens than in implementing the strict rules by the government or by the church. And so he comes in conflict with the church, and he is more or less sacked. And then when he is traveling to visit friends to get their support, his successor, he doesn't allow the wife of Sebaldus to live in the house. So she finds refuge with the peasant, and then she dies of broken heart. And when he returns, so he finds his whole family in ruin. And so the plot is not that dramatic and spectacular. It's what makes this book more precious are all these ruminations and these thoughts and more or less short essays of this Sebaldus, where he is reflecting on how he sees religion and how he is in conflict with the authorities, and how he tries to implement reason and real Christian charity instead of the strict church rules or government rules. So it's an early work of the Enlightenment. There's a focus on reason. There's not that much criticism of religion, or at least not of real pious religion. There's a lot of criticism of the church, and there are nicely illustrated engravings by Daniel Chodowiecki, who was, I think, the most important German illustrator in the late 18th century. He illustrated many books, and also in this nice volume, it's a printing of 1916 that contains his illustrations. Then next to it, this is a work. There's also a curiosity, a strange book. It was written by an author called Fischer. He was a German professor for philosophy and aesthetics, and he was a very unique person and character. He really got in conflict with the German bourgeois, with the acclaimed literary elite, because he made a satire on Goethe's Faust. He didn't think a lot of it, but this was not well received because Goethe was really admired at that time, and he also wrote this novel in two parts. I'm afraid I can't translate the German title Auch einer properly into English. You could translate it like Another One, or Also One. That is a sort of enigmatic title. It's a very unique story about a German intellectual who has many whimsies and tics, and he has very strange views of the world. And he is also a bit of a grumpy character who is sharing his disappointment about society with the reader. And then this book has a peculiar structure, because in the middle of it, then there is also a second embedded. There's another story about a rural society and the Stone Age in Germany, and there are some links with the frame narrative. But it's a very peculiar, very, very unique book. It was very popular in German until the beginning of the 20th century. There have been many reprints of it, but after then, in the second half of the 20th century, I think it was more or less forgotten, and I don't think that there are any new editions of this book. But it's a highly original work. But again, as I said, I'm afraid I don't think that there has ever been an English translation of this. The same holds true for the next volume. These are 4 volumes of one series. Books were very popular in the 1880s in Germany. So it's not shallow entertainment, it's not trash literature, but it's also not high literature at the level of Nobel Prize winners. It's called the Familie Buchholz, so the Buchholz family, and it's, if you're interested in what our great-great-grandparents read, then this was the type of book that was very popular. It was present in almost all families of the middle class. It's the story. The book is written like these were letters of Mrs. Wilhelmine Buchholz, a middle class wife, to the editor, where she tells about the daily life of her family, a working class family, but this is all a very humoristic and satirical picture of all the little vanities and ambitions and the trickery of the middle class and the working class, how they try to cheat on their neighbors and to always be and have the upper hand. But on the outward appearance, they are all very moral and immaculate, and so there's this bigotry is of the middle class is nicely depicted in this volume. So we're really very carefully printed and nice bindings, and you see these illustrations here on the cover. It's not necessary to read all of 5 or 6 volumes that were published, but I think you get the basic idea of it after you've read one volume. But it's an interesting insight into what the German middle class was reading at the end of the 19th century. Okay, in this shelf, it's worth taking a look on the second row. There are at least 3 volumes that I think are interesting. It's they're books published by a small independent publisher in England, the Tartarus Press. So and they are specialized on publishing or republishing books of the so no, it's not weird fiction, but it's uncanny fiction. It's not, sometimes it's a bit horror or the uncanny, mystic, enigmatic sort of story. And sometimes they are republishing authors that had their big time and have been forgotten, like this volume of Arthur Machen. And you see that they are really nicely made with rich decorations or even gilt on the cover, and very, very carefully made books. But they are also publishing new authors, a contemporary one. I think the volume on the right-hand side, Figurehead, by Carly Holmes. This is a contemporary author, and all of the volumes are really carefully made and very nice, and even the price is very reasonable. So it looks like luxury editions, but they really aren't. The price is very reasonable. Okay, let's move on to the next shelf. This shelf is completely dedicated to the English author Anthony Trollope. These are the English editions. Unfortunately, he is not very much well known in Germany. So Dickens is much more popular here, but almost nobody knows of Anthony Trollope. And it was by chance that I came across him a few years ago, and I immediately fell in love with him. And I really, for me, he's on the same level as Dickens. He was as prolific a writer as Dickens. I think he published 47 or 48 novels. I don't have read all of them, but what we have here on this shelf is the 2 series that he published. He published 2 series of 6 novels each. The Barsetshire series, more in about the clerical life in England, and the Palliser series, more about the political life in England. But this is not dry matter. It really has a very humoristic view also of the vanities, of the small character flaws of his characters, but always he's not mocking at them. He's not ridiculing them. He has a very caring and loving attitude towards his characters. And yeah, I also I loved all the Palliser and Barsaghir novels. I also loved all the standalone novels that I've read so far, which are not that many. But you see that there are at least 3 of them here on this shelf, as well. The Vicar of Bullhampton, Dr. Waddleby's School, and Lady Anna. Here let's also take a look on the second row. Here there's also another gem. These are the 7 volumes of the Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, this masterpiece of French literature of the early 20th century. And so this is the first complete German edition that was published in the 1950s, translated by Eva Rechel-Mertins. And they're all nicely bound. And yeah, I love them. This is really a masterpiece, how Marcel Proust is trying to reconstruct his biography and also his personality by really dissecting his memories and all his emotions and his own character traits with a really chirurgical precision. This is really outstanding. It takes a lot of time to, you have to read it slowly. There are some sentences that extend over more than 1 page, so, but it's worth the time and the effort. Okay, here again, 2 volumes of Anthony Trollope's Barsaghir series, and then Mary Shelley. At least in Germany, she's, I think, only known for her novel Frankenstein, but she published more than that, and this is another of her novels, The Last Man. This describes a sort of dystopic pandemic setting. So there is a mysterious infectious disease, and the majority of the world's population is dying, and only a few people remain. So the title makes a lot of sense, A Last Man. So in these on this shelf, mostly volumes published by the Folio Society, and there's a publisher in England who issues these nice volumes of classics, not only from the English literature, but also translations from other literature, from the literature of other countries. And usually they are illustrated individually by contemporary artists, and this volume is an exception. Here they are not, these are not illustrations by contemporary artists, but these are paintings of the time of the novel. I think there's a couple of paintings by David Caspar Friedrich. I think they are a perfect fit. This sort of melancholy atmosphere of his paintings perfectly match this topic novel. Okay, so what do we have? What else do we have here? So there is another interesting thing. A volume, Isaac Dinesen. So this is a pseudonym of the writer Blixen, who is famous for her novel about Africa. I don't know exactly the English title. Maybe it's Out of Africa. I think that was also very successfully transformed into a movie. But this is a completely different piece of work. These are really 7 Gothic novels, really novels of the mysterious, of the uncanny, of the horror type. Again, you see this, like all of these Folio Society volumes, very, very nicely bound with this golden embossings and nice illustrations. They are, if you buy them new from the publisher, they're quite costly, but most of them are also available on the secondhand book market and the usual platforms, and then you can get them at a very reasonable price. Another a writer in English language who is very little known in Germany is Sheridan Le Fanu. And this is his novel Uncle Silas. Maybe it's well known in England, but in Germany it isn't. This story about a young girl, an orphan, who is sent to a distant relative. I think it's an uncle or great uncle, Silas. So he has to raise her. And from the outward appearance, Uncle Silas is a very strict and pious character, but this is all fake. And he's a really greedy man who just tries to get rich, or even to kill his niece in order to get hold of her fortune. And there are rumors that he had already killed in the past, and I think another distant relative was found dead, almost murdered in his guest room. And so this is sort of a closed room mystery, because the victim was the only person in the room, locked from the inside. So, and that was the reason why there was no a lawsuit against Uncle Silas. But so then in this book, the mystery is solved. But I won't tell you how it was solved. So it's also sort of a slightly disturbing novel with a lot of subtle horror. So when you see how the real, when you begin to understand the real character and the real intentions of this Uncle Silas. Okay, then we have the remainder of the day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I don't think I need to tell a lot about him. He was winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, so he is well known. Let's move on. Okay, I want to pick this one here. This is Goodbye Berlin by Christopher Isherwood. This is particularly interesting from the German perspective, because Christopher Isherwood was an American citizen who lived in Berlin, in the German capital at the time, in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So when he experienced this, how this very liberal society in this very thriving city, in this metropolitan city, in the roaring 20s, when suddenly this changed, and the political extremes became more visible, and became more force and power, and when all this liberalism ended, and he had finally had to leave Berlin. So this is a very interesting picture of Berlin at the eve of the Nazi regime. So this is very interesting. But it's not written like a factual report. It's a work of literature. But there's a lot of local of local atmosphere caught in this nice book. And then finally, a small gem of English literature, A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. So this is a rather short book. It's about a young man, from a soldier who returns from World War I, where he was heavily traumatized, and now he tries to find his way back into society, back into normal life. And so to do so, he moves to rural England. His first job is to restore a picture, a painting, a medieval painting, I think, in a church there. And this is sort of meditative work. And then he gets acquainted with with the villagers, and trying to link to the society, and he's working on his traumas, and he is meeting another young man who seems to be in a similar situation, but is working as a sort of an archaeologist, and also this restoring of a picture and archaeological work can also be seen as a sort of a parable to try to get back to your former life, or to another view of life after all the traumas that they have experienced in the atrocities of World War I. Okay, next shelf, 4 volumes. This is one novel. For me, this is one of the masterpieces of German literature of the 20th century, Jahrestage by Uwe Johnson. That it was actually translated in 2018 into English. I think the English title is Anniversaries, a Year in the Life of Gisain Crespal. And it's there are at least 2 levels in the story. The first level is the life of a German immigrant, Gisain Crespal, who lives in New York in the 1960s. And she's reflecting on the society, what is happening around her, and on an international political scale by reading the New York Times. And so snippets from the Times are frequently cited and used here to explain the political atmosphere and the societal atmosphere of the 1960s in the US from the perspective of a German immigrant. But then there's a second level. There are also always these flashbacks where her family history in rural Germany is narrated, and three generations of her family history in a small village in eastern Germany that later became the German Democratic Republic. This described, but from the beginning of the 20th century and the First World War, and then the Weimar Republic, then the Nazi regime, Second World War, the refugees arriving, and then into the early years of the German Democratic Republic, when then again another dictatorship by the Socialist Party began. And this is, so her whole family history is also then reflected and narrated in this second level. And there are always nicely linked and interwoven these two different levels. And Uwe Johnson, he was also very he had a high affinity to the English language and English literature. He lived and died in England, in London, and he also translated many works of English literature into German. So he's a sort of someone who liked to build bridges between the German and the English literature and language. And so it's a huge work. It's, I think, more than 1,500 pages, but it's definitely worth it. So yeah, for me, as I mentioned, it's one of the masterpieces, one of the real masterpieces and milestones of German literature. Also, this whole narrative concept that Uwe Johnson used here was highly original and new at that time. So this really was a completely new approach to writing a novel in German. Okay, and yeah, this is also, I thought that it would be impossible to turn this book into a film, but actually I think in the early 2000s, there was a film produced by Margarete von Trotta, which I also liked very much. I think this was really a congenial adaptation. Then there's 4 volumes of the French writer Charles Baudelaire. I don't think I need to tell a lot about him. He's very well known. For anyone who is interested in French poetry, Charles Baudelaire, and in particular his book The Flowers of Evil are very well known, and I think also a milestone in French poetry. And next to it, this is Italian literature in the Italian original. This is a series by the Italian publisher Einaudi, who is publishing literary classics and also contemporary authors in this series of hardbound volumes. I like to pick one author, Donatella di Pietrantonio. This year, 2024, she also won. Her latest novel won the most prestigious Italian literary prize, the Primo Strega. I haven't read the recent one, but I like the early works of her. For example, this novel, La Minuta, that describes how a foster child has to return to her biological family because they changed their minds and they claim her. So she has to, from her upper middle class, very protected life, she has to move to her completely unknown biological parents, who are living. It's lower working class, on the verge of criminality sometimes, and so in a very precarious conditions. Now she has to adjust to this new form of life, and she's completely torn between these two families, and so she feels sort of a loyalty to both her biological and parents and her foster parents, and it's a very interesting, challenging situation described. I don't know whether it was translated into English, maybe. Then there's Michela Murgia. I think she could be considered as one of the most important contemporary Italian writers, most influential ones. Unfortunately, she died early this year, I think. She was about my age, so I think 51 or 52, and she died of cancer this year. And I think any book that you can get hold of written by Michela Murgia is worth to be read. This is really Italian literature at its best. I think her latest book is called Tre ciotole, Three Boxes should be the English title. Okay, Gianni Solla, Il ladro di quaderno. I've already presented this book in the English, the Italian and the German version. Also made an interview with the author. There is an English translation in preparation, The Notebook Thief by Harper Via, but the publication was postponed to November next year. And then we have Goliarda Sapienza. This was an Italian writer. She was a very unusual woman, very unconventional, and also in her book she is she very freely describes also her erotic adventures, and this was considered unacceptable by many Italian publishers, and I think it was only published in Italy after a translation of her work was published in another country. I don't remember whether it was France or Spain or Germany, but only after then, indirectly, then the Italian publishers were convinced to translate it. And then we have Mario Rigoni Stern. This is an interesting author. He is from northern Italy, in a region where also a German-speaking minority lives, and he is part of this German-speaking minority, or is bilingual. He wrote his literary works. He wrote them in Italian, and many of them they are about the World War I and World War II, and not that much about the war itself, but about what is the aftermath in society and in nature. Has a very close relation to nature and a very poetic writing. And also, I think in the first bookshelf too, I presented a volume that is almost a complete edition of his complete works. Okay, then we have Paul Auster, the New York trilogy. I think I already made a special video about this. Erasmus von Rotterdam, Lob der Torheit. I don't know. I think it was a work of the Humanist Age. Must have been translated into English, but I don't know the title by heart. And this is a book by an interesting author, Hans Wollschläger. Actually, he is mostly known in Germany as the translator of James Joyce's Ulysses. So the most recent and the most erudite translation of James Joyce's Ulysses was made by Hans Wollschläger. But he also was an author of a very he had a very experimental approach to literature. He was strongly influenced by another very original, peculiar German writer, Arno Schmidt, and he wrote. He's not strictly imitating his style. He has his own style, but you see that he's doing a very he got a lot of inspiration from Arno Schmidt's experimental way of writing, and I don't think that his work it's a rather obscure work. It's more or less completely unknown in Germany, and so I don't think that it has ever been translated into English. Okay, then we have a couple of volumes from the Library of America, this excellent American publisher who publishes all the great American authors, a couple of volumes by Philip Roth. I don't think I need to tell a lot about him. Jack London here. In Germany, he is mostly known for The Sea Wolf, White Fang, and The Call of the Wild. And so I'm glad that through this edition of the Library of America, also got acquainted with his short stories and also with Martin Eden, this novel about a young man who is trying to find his way as an artist. Okay, Francis Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, etc. well known, and Walt Whitman. So anyone who is interested in American poetry, there's no way around Walt Whitman and, for example, his Leaves of Grass, which I adore. And then we have a few paperbacks of Italian literature. Elena Ferrante, I think she's most known for this 4 volumes of My Genial Friend, but she also wrote many other books. This is La Via Bugiarda degli Adulti, so the life full of lies of the adults, I've translated very freely. And it's about a girl who is growing up. It's sort of a coming of age, and she becomes aware of all the little and big lies of the adults around her, of the family, the family secrets, and what were the lies behind why some links to other family members were broken, and a sort of disillusioning experience that she has. And then there's a book that is very special to me, this volume by Jhumpa Lahiri, In Altre Parole, or in English title would be In Other Worlds. Jhumpa Lahiri is actually, she's an American writer with roots in Bengali, but she used to live and to publish in the US in English, and then all of a sudden she fell in love with the Italian language, and she decided to learn Italian and to move to Italy together with her family and to live there, to immerse herself completely into the Italian culture and language and literature. And then by now she even writes in Italian. I think this is the first book that she wrote in Italian, and it's about her love story with the Italian language and Italian literature. And it was one of the first books that I read in the Italian original, so this also makes it special to me, and it describes what I experienced, how one can fall in love with the Italian language all of a sudden, and then it really develops, it becomes a passion, and you want to learn the language, you want to read the literature, and you want to be able to talk or even to write in this language. And so there's a strong personal connection with this book, because in part it also reflects my love story with the Italian language and literature. Okay, moving on to the bottom part of this shelf. Then we have 3 volumes, large ones, by the author that I mentioned earlier, Arno Schmidt, who has influenced Hans Wollschläger. And these are, I think that was translated into English, The School for Atheists, it's called. These are printed, some of his works are printed in this large format because some books he used to write in several columns to really have to present parallel plots, or plots that are running sometimes in parallel, sometimes they're entwined, and so some books are printed in this big format. And the other one that is here, I think what also translated into English with the title Evening Edged in Guilt. Okay, and the final book I would like to present is the Essays by Michel de Montaigne, a French writer. So I think he lived in the 16th century, and so it was about 150 years before the Age of Enlightenment, but actually he was really a thinker. He was writing in a way like the thinkers of the Enlightenment. I think he can be considered as the predecessor of the French philosophers of Enlightenment. He was a very independent, liberal, critical, skeptical thinker who didn't take for granted any of the prejudices of the common beliefs of his time, whether it be religious or about how society should be organized, or how personal relations should be organized. He had his own thoughts, really driven by logical thinking, by reason, and really, he was in conflict with many of the general convictions of his time, because he had his own way of thinking in there. And this is a collection, you can't read this from front to back cover. This is a collection of dozens of essays, short, sometimes it's just 1 page or less than a page, short essays on various subjects, really from everything. It's about family, about personal growth, about personal relations, about religion, about society, about the world, and everything. And it's really, it's so exhilarating and enlightening to read his essays. And so this is a German translation. This is not the French original. So the German publisher issued this new translation in the late 1990s. Okay, difficult to get it back into here. So let's keep it here. I can tidy up the shelf later. So yeah, that's it for today. This was another bookshelf tour, the third one. So there are still four bookshelves to be presented, and then we can maybe take a closer look at the second row in some cases. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for watching. I hope there has been some things that you found interesting, or that you have inspired you to take a look at some author previously unknown to you. Hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye bye and ciao.